Ruczak. I'm here at View Conference 2024 with Shannon Tindle, director of Ultraman Rising. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, my pleasure.
I would love to hear a little bit about how you launched your career.
So I grew up in rural Kentucky, where nobody does what I do, and I never remember a time when I wasn't drawing, but it just didn't seem like something that you could do. So I was a biology major. I thought I wanted to be a doctor for a while. My parents are both nurses, and my dad said, you're doing well in school, but you don't really seem to be into it. Not because I was going to the University of Louisville. And I said, well, I want to get in animation. I want to get into film. So he said, all right, well, let's see if we can figure it out. So I applied to CalArts. I never put a portfolio together. I applied to CalArts. I was rejected, but then I tried again the next year and I got in. And then I was there for 2 years, and my first job was working on a show called Mickey Mouse Works. And I was actually working on that my second semester of my second year at CalArts, which was great because I had no money. I'd used it all on school, and to have a little bit of money in my pocket, and I was actually getting to do character design on that show was pretty incredible. So that's where it kind of all began, and I just kind of worked my way up from there.
Oh, wow. How did your background in character design influence your approach to directing?
Well, I always approach character design from the perspective of story. Like you have costume design, you want to tell things about the character without them speaking. How they stand, how they fix their hair, do they wear makeup, do they not wear makeup, all those things, what choices do they make? And I always knew that I wanted to tell my own stories. I grew from in the South, we're always telling stories. Conversation is a big part of our familial relationships. And I knew I wanted to tell stories. And so even from the early days when I was a character designer, I was pitching to studios, wanting to do my own things. And so it really came out of, that tradition that I'd grown up with of telling stories and wanting to tell stories to a broader audience.
And I would love to hear about what first drew you to making Ultraman Rising. I know it was a long journey of getting it to the screen. If you could tell me a little bit about that process.
So I was first introduced to Ultraman on, I think it was WBRD Channel 41 in my hometown of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. And I didn't know anything about the character. I didn't know how big the character was. I just saw this giant red and silver man fighting monsters, and it blew me away, and it stuck with me. When you go to Japan, you can't escape the character. And I have friends who grew up in Japan, like Ultraman was everywhere. I could buy toys, comic books, coloring books. I didn't have any of that. Well, when I moved to LA in '97, and I went to Little Tokyo, Ultraman was everywhere. And I was like, wait, and Ultraman Tiga had just come out. So it kind of rekindled my love for the character. And then I thought, what if I took a character like that while he's big in not just Japan, but all over Asia, could I tell a relatable story about parents and children that might appeal to a broader audience and bring a character like that? So I had this idea called Made in Japan, called Gamma Man, because there was I could never get the rights to Ultraman. Yeah. But so for 20 years, I pitched this idea. And everywhere, and I had it set up at Sony for a while. And when we had a difference of creative opinions there, but Christine Belson, who runs Sony Animation, she's incredible. I love her so much. She was very generous and said, "We'll let you take the film out." And so when I brought it over to Netflix, they said, "We love this script, we love this story. What if we could actually get you the rights to Ultraman?" And then they flew me to Japan, and I pitched it to Tsukagoshi-san and the folks at Tsuburaya, and they loved the idea, and they have been very supportive, and we got to tell that story. But my thing was, I want to tell the story about parents and children. It's to me, it's not a Superman film. It's a film about relationships that happens to star a superhero.
Wow. I'm so glad that it all came together for all those years.
It only took 23 years. I have artwork that has 2001 in the corner. Oh, wow. And I created at the same time I created Kubo in the same thing. I have artwork with the 2001 over in the corner. So, yeah.
It's an amazing time capsule.
Yeah.
And what led you to working with ILM and your collaboration with Hayden Jones?
So I was doing, my good friend Teddy Biaselli, who's an executive over at Netflix, had asked if I would consider adapting a book called Ollie's Odyssey, written by William Joyce, about a toy that gets separated from his little boy. And I love the idea. I read the book, and there had been some initial work done on it, and I had a different take on it. I wanted to set it in my hometown. And when you start a project and you know that there's going to be a big CG element, that was a live action series with CG characters in it, and you're going to test a lot of different studios. Mm-hmm. So there was an executive on the Netflix VFX side that said, "Look, all of the bids are coming in at about the same amount. ILM's going to get it done because she used to work there. ILM's is going to get it done the right way. So maybe you should work with them." And I met Steph and Hayden, and it was kind of love at first sight. Mm-hmm. And I love working with them so much because they are so malleable. They're so open to new ideas, trying new things. And I've become good friends with not just Steph and Hay, but Rob Bradow, who is the chief creative officer over there. And that's a place I wanted to work with when I was a little kid. I thought, man, if I could work at ILM one day, it'd be incredible. And of course, I was basing it on the kind of the practical effects work that they were doing on the Star Wars films and Raiders of the Lost Ark. But now I want to work with them on everything. We've got a rapport, and when you have that chemistry with fellow creators, you know that you can get a lot more bang for your buck because you're kind of speaking the same language, and you're finishing each other's sentences. So I've loved my collaboration with them so far, and I want to continue to work with them on everything I do.
That's amazing. So glad that all worked out.
Yeah.
You mentioned before about how this is really a story about parents and children and that relationship. How did you work with your animators? I know you mentioned in your talk that you encouraged them to bring their personal experiences into the process. I'd love to hear about that.
So it's funny, just recently, one of the animators at ILM, I think at the Vancouver studio, said the first time that I launched them, he was like, what is happening right now? Because I'll launch with a story, and I'll start to tell a very personal story about something that happened to me. And the animator's like, I'm trying to understand what's going on. He's not talking about animation. He's not talking about posing. And he said, you got to the end of the story, and he said, and that's what this scene is about. That's where it came from, and that's what I want you to put into it. And I wanted you to know. There were moments where, and I tried to encourage that with the team, where I was telling stuff that was deeply personal. I was getting emotional talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to feel the freedom to be able to express their emotions in that way, in that room, to be able to say, I went through something similar. Because I feel like the more open and vulnerable you are, the more open and vulnerable they can be in their work. Mm-hmm. And you see it up on the screen. You see those moments up on the screen where they've gone through something. There were moments on Ollie. There was a moment in Ollie where Ollie can only be seen by Billy except in one instance where Billy's mother is dying, and she can see him, and she says, can you give me some water? And it was something that I'd gone through with a family member, lying in bed, dying. And that scene, I knew was a tricky one. They put the cup on a rod, and I told them, I said, look, if done wrong, people will laugh, and they cannot laugh in this moment. And they were so thoughtful in the approach. Ollie is so gentle in it. But again, because I was willing to express something that happened to me, they felt they'd been given the permission to express that in their work. And it's one of my favorite scenes in anything that I've done, because the animator allowed themselves to be so open and vulnerable and understood what we needed to accomplish in that scene. So
that's really beautiful to hear that personal influence there. Wow. So I'm really glad you could work with your animators on that level, that deep communication.
Well, it's like these things take a long time to make. Mm-hmm. That's why I have to have an emotional connection with anything that I make. I can't, even if it's a big character, I have to be able to find my way into it in a personal way, because it's going to take, especially in animation, it's going to take 4 or 5 years sometimes to make. Mm-hmm. And that's what gets me through it, knowing that, at least for me, there's an importance to it. It's not just throwaway. It's not just a commercial for something. It's something that's meaningful for me. And then that helps justify like the hours that I'm working. Because when you're in the middle of a project, you're never not thinking about it. And So, but if you can incorporate your life into your projects, I think you can find a nice balance, which is what Ultraman Rising is all about, is finding balance.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also love to talk about your approach to the camera for this
Yeah.
film and how you wanted to keep everything so based in actual lenses.
Yeah. Well, it was one of the things that I loved about Pacific Rim. I've gotten to know Guillermo, and he's such an incredible, not just incredible filmmaker, but an incredible person. And what I loved about that film, because Hal Hickel, who's a good friend of mine, who was the animation supervisor on that film, was like, Guillermo in that film, like, we use real rigs. It was a Technocrane, or it was even if it was a digital version or a virtual version of that camera, Guillermo wanted it to be grounded. Because even if an audience doesn't know what lenses you're using or what cameras you're using, they've seen enough movies, they've got a pretty good education. They can feel when something's off or when you're cheating. And even though it's a big, broad film, we have a 35-foot tall baby, we're dealing with issues where that 35-foot tall baby, I wanted people to feel like it was their child.
Yeah.
And I thought one way to get there and to understand Ken's story and the loneliness he feels is to try as best as we can, is not just to have practical prime lenses, but also to have the artifacts that you get with those lenses. So Hayden Jones, who is our visual effects supervisor on not just Ollie, but also Ultraman Rising, they did this deep dive research. They found examples of like what lens flares look like on Toho scope lenses and how do we recreate that in the style. All those elements, even though we had a stylized look, it felt like a practical camera is on it. In final layout, one of my favorite ideas is there's that scene when Emmy is being born and she's being out in the ocean. And a lot of times the way that you show scale is by showing a small object next to a big thing. So you have a bird fly off the shoulder of Ultraman. I knew I didn't want to do any of that stuff. So our head of final layout said, what if we add a little helicopter jitter? Because it's something that when you're shooting a helicopter shot in a film, it's because you're shooting something big and wide that's expansive and you need to be far away from it. So he put just a little bit of helicopter jitter in there subliminally. Again, the audience may not know what a helicopter shot or a drone shot is, but they've seen enough films that incorporate it and they know when they have it. And those bringing those very grounded elements from real cameras and lenses into the filmmaking, I think helped us a lot to tell that story, a believable story.
Absolutely. Really such a beautiful effect to see on screen. Yeah. And I'd also love to hear any career advice that you have, maybe something you wish you'd known when you were first starting out.
I think career advice would be listen as much as you talk. I would say hire not just people who are great at their jobs, but who are just good people. We had an incredible production team led by my producers, Tom Knott and Lisa Poole on the film. And they're just good people and they treat our folks well. And I think that a lot of times people think in order to make good films that you have to be a bully or you have to be uncompromising. And what I say is you can't make films without your team, and they need to have a good balance between life and work. And if you allow that and you allow them participate in a real way in the movie, you're going to get a much bigger film in a way that's not going to be detrimental to people's health. The film is going to be better and you're going to feel better at the end of it. So I would just say, be cool, be sweet. Be thoughtful and think about what other folks are going to and listen to them.
Oh, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you so much for chatting.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for the great questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool. All right.
And make sure you check out the rest of our content from View Conference 2024.